There are countless doors all over the world that haven't been opened for decades, and even centuries. The question is why? It seems that nowadays you can open any door you want. The truth is that some doors were sealed for a grave reason. And so far, nobody has found out what treasures and mysteries they hide. Here are 4 doors that keep their secrets all too well. The Taj Mahal. First up, we've got the Taj Mahal in India, one of the most romantic places in the world. Shah Jahan commissioned it in 1631 and dedicated it to his 3rd wife, who he loved like crazy. They were married for 19 years and had a whopping 14 kids together. But unfortunately, she passed away while giving birth to their last baby. Shah Jahan was heartbroken and decided to build an epic tomb to remember her by. The construction took a whopping 20 years to finish. The building has quite an interesting layout. The design is super unusual with these 4 massive 130-foot tall minarets that stand on the corners of a huge platform. They're not just there for looks. Back in the 17th century, architects were having some serious issues with buildings collapsing under their own weight. So, the chief architect of the Taj Mahal made sure to place those minarets as far away from the tomb as possible. And he even tilted them in a way so that if they did fall, they wouldn't wreck the rest of the Taj Mahal. Talk about planning ahead. The Taj Mahal is hiding some crazy secrets. There are sealed rooms all over the place that nobody is allowed to enter. And if you check out photos of the building from the riverside, you can spot 2 basements. But guess what? They're sealed up too. Nobody knows what's inside or why they've been locked up since the time of Shah Jahan. Apparently, there's a good reason why those rooms are off limits. Some researchers think that they were built using marble, which turns into a different substance called calcium carbonate if it's exposed to carbon dioxide. And when that happens, little bits of marble start chipping off like crazy. To make matters worse, there's no air flowing into these rooms. That means that if too much CO2 builds up in the basement, the 4 minarets could collapse. But wait, there's more. Some people think that the body of Shah Jahan's wife can be found in one of these sealed-up rooms in pristine condition. Why not? Who knows what the mysterious rooms might keep? The Great Sphinx of Giza. The Great Sphinx of Giza is shrouded in mystery. It's not just the largest monolith statue in the world, but it's also a hybrid creature with a woman's head and a lion's body that originates from Egyptian and Greek mythology. It's also very ancient. It's estimated to be around 4,500 years old. The construction of this marvel took about 3 years and required 100 workers who were not slaves and were treated with delicacies like sheep and goat meat. It is also thought that it used to be much more massive than it is now. Archaeologists found huge stone blocks and abandoned toolkits near the site. However, the real secrets of the Sphinx lie underground, near its paws. A group of scientists used a seismograph to detect 2 hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx's paws. Some people think that these rooms might be the legendary Hall of Records, which holds ancient scrolls revealing the secrets of the universe. I mean, that's way cooler than any library I've ever been to. Rumor has it that the Egyptians even had info on Atlantis stashed down there, which is like a super old version of a conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, we can't go on an adventure to check it out just yet. The chambers presumably have 2 entrances, but both remain sealed. The researchers haven't yet received the green light to check out their theory. Let's hope they won't keep us in suspense forever. Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple. This temple is located in the beautiful state of Kerala in India. This temple is famous for more than just its breathtaking beauty. Underneath the temple there are 6 vaults, creatively named A, B, C, D, E, and F. The enormous iron doors to these chambers add to the mystery of what's behind them. A few years back, the authorities decided to open these vaults to the world, but it wasn't an easy task. You can't just open the doors and enter the vaults. It required a lot of work. It took them a while, but finally, in 2011, they opened 5 of the 6 chambers. And guess what they found? Tons of treasure. Bags of gold, precious gemstones, and priceless diamond jewelry. The estimated worth of everything found in the vaults is a whopping $1 trillion. It's like the temple was the real-life inspiration for Aladdin's Cave of Wonders. But wait, I said 5 of the 6. What happened to the last one? Vault B has remained closed, but not for lack of trying. They simply didn't manage to open it. There is even a belief that it's fatally cursed. Legend says that only a saint or sage can break the curse by chanting a specific mantra. But no one has been able to do this yet, presumably because we don't have saints or sages at our disposal. There is also rumor that in the 30s some temple invaders tried to enter Vault B to do some good old looting, but they never reached their target. Apparently terrible snakes materialized out of nowhere and chased the gang away. But of course, this is just an urban legend, and there is not proof of that. However, it is said that the Auditor General dealing with the temple claimed that Vault B had been opened at least 7 times since 1990, and nothing bad happened to anyone who entered. Who knows? Maybe we should send Indiana Jones to check it out. The First Emperor's Tomb. Deep under a hill, completely undisturbed and surrounded by dangerous traps, lies an ancient 2,000-year-old tomb. It belongs to Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He was born in the Qin state and became king when he was just a boy. But when he grew up and gained full power, he united the warring states ancient China was divided into by conquering them. After that, he created the Qin dynasty. When he died in 210 BCE, they buried him deep underground in a massive tomb. And when I say massive, I mean massive! Back in 1974, some farmers in Xi'an, China, stumbled upon something strange while digging a well, a huge terracotta soldier. This discovery led to an extensive archaeological dig that has continued for over 40 years, revealing a collection of thousands of clay soldiers. The unique thing about these soldiers is that each one has its own unique features, from hairstyles to facial expressions. It's believed that there could be up to 8,000 of these soldiers, but only 2,000 have been found so far. Interestingly, the central tomb, which is believed to be the resting place of the emperor, is still untouched. In ancient records, there are references to a vast underground city that the emperor built, complete with scenic towers, palaces, and whatnot. Sima Qian, a Han Dynasty historian, wrote that the tomb was adorned with treasures and had space for hundreds of officials, but the lack of technology to properly examine the site is what's holding things up. Qin Shi Huang was surrounded by liquid mercury in his tomb, with 2 of the streams representing the major rivers of China, Yellow River and Yangtze. The ancient Chinese believed that mercury could provide immortality, but it could have also caused the emperor's death since he regularly took mercury pills to prolong his life. The dangerous levels of mercury contamination in the soil near the tomb are the main reason why scientists are reluctant to explore it. It could be very dangerous both for people and for the environment. Now, if I had to choose which door to open, I'd probably go for the one that doesn't lead to a tomb surrounded by poisonous mercury. Call me crazy, but I'd like to avoid any potential health hazards.
When you think of an epic desert scene with blazing sun, endless dunes, and those magical little oases, you probably picture the legendary Sahara, right? But what if I tell you that 11,000 years ago, this vast expanse of hot sand looked totally different than it does today? Yeah, I don't know, I wasn't around then. But I'm told that back then, what we now call a desert was a lush paradise, brimming with lakes, rivers, grassy plains, and even woodsy forests. So, where did all this water go? There are many stories about the distant past of our planet when deserts were covered with jungles and forests, and then something happened, like changing climates or colossal earthquakes, and it all turned green lands into dunes. But how about a theory that Sahara became a desert because of humans and goats? The Sahara has seen its fair share of wet and dry drama throughout the ages, mostly thanks to little shifts in Earth's orbital tilt, causing variations in how much solar radiation hits the atmosphere. There were even times called the African humid periods, when the rain would pour in and transform the dry landscape into a bright green haven. But between 8,000 and 4,500 years ago, something really funky happened to this region. Certain areas went from humid to dry way too fast to explain it by just orbital changes. In the blink of an eye, the lush Sahara turned into the Sahara we know today. Now, if you ask scientists why it happened, they will tell you, oh, it's just poor parameterization of the data. Bet you didn't get it, did you? Well, right, let me translate it from scientific to common human. It means they really don't know the answer themselves, and they got a bunch of missing puzzle pieces. But as scientists sifted through ancient dirt and pollen samples, they spotted a quirky trend. Wherever there were pastoralists, also known as humans with their domesticated animals, the plant life seemed to shift. It was as if every time humans and their furry friends meandered through the greenery, they turned it into scrub and desert right behind them. Oops. Yep, chances are that by overgrazing, humans were sapping moisture out of the atmosphere, since plants give off moisture, which helps make clouds and making things even sunnier, leading to a quicker end of the humid vibes. Plus, our ancestors may have been getting a little too cozy with fire for land management, further speeding up the desert takeover. Anyway, scientists are sure that this lush Sahara would have turned back into desert eventually, even if humans hadn't shown up, thanks to Earth's natural rhythms. So there's no need to pin this abrupt change solely on humans. It could simply be about nature getting feedback from vegetation and dust cycles. It's difficult to determine what caused these changes, as it's all interconnected. During the last humid period, the Sahara was filled with hunter-gatherers. As things got a little drier, they started herding animals for food. The weather pushed people to herd cattle. It's also possible that grazing sped up the landscape degradation. So, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Or in this case, the human or the cow? It's tough to tell with the evidence we have now. Now today, it's safe to say that water is no longer that big of a problem in the Sahara, even though it's a huge desert and the times of lush forests there are long gone. But technology's got us covered. For example, the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer System, the biggest underground water stash on the planet. It's nestled beneath the Sahara Desert's eastern edge and stretches across 4 northeastern African countries – Sudan, Chad, Libya, and Egypt, covering a whopping 770,000 square miles and holding around 36,000 square miles of groundwater. Just look at the pipes transported when it was being built. It's the world's largest irrigation project. No wonder it's feasible to thrive in the Sahara today. But imagine thriving in the Sahara Desert with just one water source. Sounds like a tough gig, right? But the ancient Garamantes did just that, surviving and even thriving for nearly 1,000 years without monsoons or rivers flowing to their desert paradise. These clever folks were the trendsetters of urban life in the sands, and even the Romans couldn't help but notice their genius. While many thought they were just desert-dwelling savages, the Garamantes were busy building an empire in one of the toughest climates on Earth. But how did they do that? Well, they got crafty and dug a whole bunch of underground tunnels to tap into a massive sandstone aquifer. They were literally squeezing every drop of life from under the dunes. But recently, research showed that the Garamantes weren't just hardworking, they were pretty lucky too. The Garamantes had an underground aquifer that brought water up to a hill where they built over 500 fogaras, which are irrigation systems, some stretching as long as 2.5 miles. It was like sipping water through a straw, which let them irrigate their crops for nearly a century, especially since even a little rain would help recharge the system. But eventually, due to rain insufficiency, the aquifer ran low, and reaching it again would have meant digging more tunnels and relying on more people. That's a tough problem, considering these people were in the middle of food and water shortages. Guess I don't need to tell you what happened to the Garamantes, do I? The fall of the Garamentian culture might be linked to several factors. It may have been due to climate changes, or they may have simply used their water resources too much. Back in the day, the Sahara Desert was actually fertile agricultural land, thanks in part to the cool irrigation system the Garamentians created. But since fossil water isn't something you can replenish over time, the groundwater levels dropped pretty low. This likely played a big role in the kingdom's decline by the late 7th century CE. That sounds like someone who hit a lottery jackpot, used up all the money, and went back to their original not-so-cool job once the bank account got fully drained. Oh, by the way, even if the Garamantes left some secret wisdom messages for us, the chances are we'll never get what they wanted to tell us. Nobody really knows what language they used, and their texts are nearly indecipherable to us today. But let's go back to the Green Sahara. So it transformed into a desert about 4,500 years ago. But today, we can understand how people lived in those times in the Sahara thanks to natural parks in Africa that have the ultimate outdoor art gallery. There are well over 15,000 ancient paintings and carvings depicting everyday life from around 11,000 years ago. However, if the carvings aren't enough for you and you feel like visiting an actual green desert, all you have to do is book a flight to California. One of the most beautiful phenomenon in the world, the superbloom, takes place here. Look at all these colors: orange, green, pink. It's a miracle. Wildflowers bloom right in the middle of a hot desert after several years of rainfall in dry places. It's such a bright and colorful landscape that superblooms can be seen from space. This rare phenomenon can be observed in other arid places and deserts in western and southern Africa, Western Australia, and Chile. In all these places, the weather is very hot and dry in summer. Mild humid air comes in winter, and this is the ideal environment for mass flowering. Flower seeds that lie in desert sands can wait for decades before starting to produce flowers. When the hot sun destroys all the weeds and grass, and the rainfall becomes enough to moisten the soil, the seeds are kind of like, well, okay, now it's our turn to play a big game. And then hundreds of thousands of tourists come to take photos and post these beautiful pictures on social media. And this, unfortunately, is one of the main dangers for flowers. Therefore, if you find yourself in a place like this, don't pick the flowers and don't trample on them. Stay on the path, don't litter. Take only pictures and leave only footprints. You get it? Good.
You're flying over the Sahara Desert in a small, light aircraft when you spot something truly weird. It seems to belong to a very different part of the world, the ocean. But what ocean can be huge enough for this monstrous sea star to dwell there? You descend and realize that it's not a sea star. It's a towering dune with a pretty unique shape, and it's not alone. From afar, these magnificent sand structures look a bit like pyramids. They have pointed tops and radiating arms. Called star dunes, they're the most complex and largest desert dunes in the world. They're the tallest of their kind, but that's not the coolest thing about them. Researchers have found similar formations on Mars and even on one of Saturn's moons, Titan. Star dunes aren't super rare, but they're especially widespread in southeastern Morocco near the border with Algeria. That's where you're flying at the moment, and the breathtaking dune you're marveling at is Lella Lalia, probably the most famous of them all, a giant 330 feet tall. Scientists believe that it formed in less than 1,000 years. How about doing some research to find out more about these unusual formations? There, I see a great spot for landing. Star dunes got their name because of their multi-armed shapes. They form in areas where winds change direction throughout the year. But even though you can find them in different places on our planet, there is just one confirmed star dune in the rock record, the collective record of Earth's development reflected in preserved rocks. The star dune in question is in Scotland, and it's ancient, from about 250 million years ago. That's all we know about super old star dunes. Probably because we don't know what to look for to identify one. Another problem: star dunes often form in remote locations, which makes them extremely difficult to study. Imagine reaching the nearest settlement, then somehow traveling who knows how many miles to the dune itself, and then slogging up several hundred feet of shifting sand. I'll pass. But you can go since you've already landed, and the dune is right here in front of you. Currently, you're in a dune field called Erg Shabi. Lucky for you, this area has long become a popular tourist stop. Look, in the distance, there are hotels and even a good road. Scientists who examined Lella Lalia before you used ground-penetrating radar to find out more about the sand formation. This equipment can detect the tiniest differences in sand grain sizes and water content under the surface of the dune. That's how you can create a picture of its interior layers. Look out! Phew, it was a close call. See this trench? The researchers dug such trenches to take samples of long-buried sands and then examined them. It's a pretty cool process. The thing is, while buried deep inside, the quartz in the sand accumulates radiation coming from natural sources within our planet. We can compare the grains of quartz to minuscule rechargeable batteries. They can store the energy they get from radiation. When researchers bring them to the laboratory, they can make the grains release that energy, which comes out in the form of light. Scientists can measure the brightness and say when the sand enjoyed sunlight for the last time. Now, when those experts who dug the trenches looked inside Lelalalia, they were shocked. The enormous formation turned out to be very young, for a dune, of course. You'd expect a dune that is several hundred feet tall to be pretty old, like thousands or tens of thousands of years. But that wasn't the case. Well, at least not entirely. The upper part of the dune has turned 900 just recently. But look at the sand near the base of the dune. Yep, right there. Well, it was buried there around 12 or 13,000 years ago, representing ancient dunes in the area. Those good old dunes were active for a couple thousand years, and then something went wrong. Because for a whopping 8,000 years, the sand wasn't accumulating there. A mystery? Scientists might have an explanation. You see, the first part of this quiet period occurred during the time when the climate became warm and wet. Yep, even in the Sahara. It happened about 11,700 years ago. It was the end of the last ice age and the beginning of a new era, the Holocene. And guess what? The Sahara went green. It started blooming like your local botanic garden. Plants started popping up all over the place, stabilizing the sand. If you had visited the Sahara during that period, you wouldn't have recognized this place. But you would have likely come across humans wandering marshy landscapes and hunting for food. Researchers have found pottery fragments and stone tools on one side of Lelalalia. That's true. As sand dunes form and then shift throughout their lives, they swallow and protect ancient remnants of life. Just dig well enough and you might find something that will provide you with a window into the past. It can be ancient fossils, anything from fossilized shells and corals to prehistoric plants. Those can offer precious insights into the history of our planet and the living beings once inhabiting certain regions. Now, it might come as a shock, but in the Sahara Desert, scientists have uncovered well-preserved marine reptiles and fossilized fish within the layers of those ancient sand dunes. They are the remains from the time when the Sahara was covered with a sea millions of years ago. Anyway, it's time to leave that ancient paradise if you want to survive. 4,000 years ago, the wet period came to an end, and the Sahara dried out again. Interestingly, our dune didn't begin building up right away. For some time, sand probably blew through but didn't accumulate. Or the dune could have started growing in a different location. And it's a valid theory since scientists have discovered recently that Lelalalia shifts around 1.6 feet every year. It also accumulates about 6,400 tons of sand every year. Now, if you've been inspired by your dune trip and are now eager to explore more of them, I've got some unpleasant news for you. Unfortunately, although there might be star dunes locked in sandstones around the globe, they're super tricky to detect. The problem is, dunes are huge, but they lack a single distinguishing feature. So you'd really need large exposed beds of rock if you want to get a wide enough view to identify a star dune. On the bright side, there surely are places where it might be possible to do such research, but you should be ready to know that it might be just a set of various features that look like other dunes. But if you combine them, you'll say, it's likely to be a star dune. Comment below if you'd like to go on a trip in search of a star dune. Meanwhile, we'll continue our journey. You decide to have some rest and start climbing down the side of the dune. That's when you begin hearing it. Terrible, haunting sounds. Are there ghosts nearby? Worry not, you're safe. You might have heard of a phenomenon called singing sands. As you walk down some sandy slopes, you disturb the grains of sand. They rub against each other, producing friction that creates those eerie melodies. With each step, the sand beneath your feet comes alive in a ghostly choir of whistles and whispers. The sounds range from low hums to loud, high-pitched wails, as if an otherworldly symphony is echoing through the dunes. But of course, scientists have their own very practical explanation, attributing this phenomenon to the right atmospheric conditions combined with the unique size, shape, and moisture content of the grains. Now you've almost made it all the way to the bottom of the dune, but beware of slip faces. When a sand dune reaches a certain steepness, it develops a slope. That's the very slip face I was talking about. This slope is usually on the leeward side of the dune and sheltered from the prevailing wind. Sand grains start accumulating on the windward side, slowly creeping along the dune's gentle slope. At one point, they reach the top. Gravity takes over and they start sliding down, triggering a cascading effect. It looks like a miniature sand avalanche, and I wouldn't want to end up in its way. In 79 CE, the Vesuvius volcano erupted and burned down two beautiful cities of the Roman Empire, Pompeii and Herculaneum. Many of you have probably heard about this tragic story. However, few people know that in the middle of the 18th century, archaeologists discovered ancient scrolls from that time amongst the ruins of Herculaneum. For any scientist or historian, such a discovery is a treasure trove that offers insights into the thoughts and lives of people from over 2,000 years ago. However, the problem was that 1,800 scrolls were found in very poor condition, singed by the heat of the volcano, coated in ash and soot. They had become hardened black lumps. Brittle as coal, any careless movement could destroy them. Scientists were aware that invaluable knowledge from an ancient Roman library was concealed within, and endeavored to decipher the texts. One method was to cut the scrolls in half and scrape off the thin layers of solid dust and ashes. Then, the researchers created a special machine that could slowly unroll the scrolls. They managed to read a few words, but unfortunately, such methods damaged and even destroyed some of the artifacts. In those instances, archaeologists could only wait for advancements in technology that would allow them to unfold and read the scrolls. And finally, this day has arrived. Artificial intelligence has now enabled researchers to decipher texts written 2,000 years ago, even though the inscriptions on the scrolls were charred and nearly illegible. Initially, scientists scanned the scrolls and created high-resolution digital models. This process allowed specialists to identify the areas where ancient ink had altered the texture and shape of the papyrus fibers. In the regions where ink was applied, the papyrus was slightly thicker and contained a higher level of carbon, the key component of the ink. The researchers developed a machine learning model capable of detecting these subtle details within the papyrus. They uploaded thousands of 3D images of the scrolls to the internet, inviting people to collaborate with AI in decoding the text. During the early stages, the system occasionally made errors, making human assistance essential. To incentivize participation, scientists and investors from Silicon Valley offered $1 million to anyone who could successfully decode the texts. This initiative significantly accelerated the process, resulting in the deciphering of several passages from the ancient works. Fragments of the first transcripts are like a blog about how to enjoy life. The author of the scroll, Philodemus, was a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who considered pleasure and luxury the highest goal in his life. So, Philodemus thought so too. We do not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant. It feels as if it was written by some modern influencer talking about a detox program or a diet. It seems that people who lived 2,000 years ago were almost the same as modern ones. Philodemus was apparently a wealthy man, because he lived in a villa that may have belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law. In his works, the author criticized the Stoics, who couldn't say anything about pleasure at all. Philodemus was such an ardent fan of Epicureanism that one of the scientists compared him to a guy who collected albums from only one band and nothing else. several hundred Herculaneum scrolls remain unread. Scientists believe that they may contain works by Aristotle, Homer, Sophocles, and the Stoics. Fortunately, with modern AI technologies, the decryption process will go on much faster. But how did historians and linguists decipher ancient texts in the past centuries? It was actually a very difficult mental job. Let's say you found an ancient slab in the 19th century, somewhere in Greece. To understand what was written there, you'd have to compare it to several other deciphered plates with similar writings of that era or similar languages. Letter by letter, symbol by symbol, you'd be deciphering ancient writings for several months or even years to figure out, say, the recipe for ancient mashed potatoes. Fortunately, with the development of computer technology, those days are long gone. Now, all ancient scrolls can be scanned and uploaded to a database on a computer. You may not even have to decipher the text for a long time if the computer finds a match of characters in other ancient manuscripts. But even if you have a perfectly preserved piece of papyrus or an ancient book where all letters are visible, this doesn't mean that you and AI will be able to decipher it. One of the most famous encrypted texts is the Voynich manuscript. This work, which consists of 240 colorful pages, was acquired by Polish bookseller in 1912. He found that book intriguing because of astrological symbols, unknown plants, and unusual human figures drawn on its pages. And all this was accompanied by handwritten texts. The author had beautiful, clear handwriting, but the language of the book is still unknown. Someone wrote this art book around the beginning of the 15th century and divided it into 6 sections devoted to botany, astronomy, biology, cooking, medicine, and cosmology. Many scientists and linguists have tried to decipher the mysterious drawings with inscriptions, but no one has gotten reliable results. Even AI couldn't help this difficult task. Some believe that this book is dedicated to science, and others believe that it contains knowledge about witchcraft. Perhaps it's a mix of science and magic. According to one version, the manuscript is a medical textbook that copied information from other scientific works from the Middle Ages. Before the invention of the printing press, people copied books and rewrote them by hand without worrying about copyrights. It's possible that the author of the manuscript outlined all their knowledge about herbal medicines and the influence of astrology on health. People in the past believed that the state of the body and stars in the sky were connected. The coolest thing is that the book has been scanned. You can download it in high resolution and try to decrypt it yourself. Who knows? Maybe you will succeed and get some ancient secret knowledge. An unknown language or poor text condition may not always be a problem for linguists. Imagine that you open some copy of classical literature dated to the 19th century. You read the pages carefully, and at the end of the day, you feel slightly unwell. You read the book every day and feel worse and worse. At some point, you go to the hospital, and doctors tell you that you've been poisoned. Yeah, sometimes working with old books can be literally dangerous for your health. There are even catalogs of poisonous books in the world. They are toxic not because someone intentionally sprayed them with poison to hurt the reader, but because people wanted to make books look more colorful. Recently, 2 such books have been withdrawn from the National Library of France because of their bright green covers. The pages were ordinary, but the hardcover could have been coated with arsenic. The mass production of books took place in the 19th century. Book publishers wanted to release as many copies as possible, so they used not expensive leather covers for them, but cheaper fabric options. To make a book attractive to customers, they painted them in bright green, yellow, red, and other colors. They got the green color of the cover thanks to the bright pigment created from copper and arsenic. It was a very cheap dye, but brighter than other dyes containing copper carbonate. An arsenic dye was used not only for books, but also to create candles and wallpaper. The problem was that the dye's pigment decomposed quickly and released toxic carcinogenic fumes. Arsenic caused severe health problems. People calmly lived in their homes and couldn't understand what was happening to them. The same thing happened to many readers of that time. It was only by the end of the 19th century that people stopped selling toxic items. Now, to read a poisonous book, if you want to do it that is, you have to wear gloves and a protective mask. And after work, wash your hands thoroughly. These dark patches on Greenland's ice sheet aren't just any old stains. Every summer, the ice, which is usually bright white, turns murky gray in certain areas. This so-called dark zone was a huge mystery for a long time, until some studies discovered that this weird transformation was connected to the odd appearance of red, green, and brown-colored algae. The scariest part is that this algae bloom keeps growing. The dark zone is getting darker, and terrifying microbes might start appearing. Now, the rest of the world should be concerned. The Greenland ice sheet is like a massive ice blanket that covers around 80% of the island. It's so thick that it holds about 8% of the world's freshwater ice. For most of the year, the ice looks like a giant untouched white sheet stretching over the land. But when summer rolls around and temperatures start to rise, things begin to change. The ice melts, revealing rocky areas along the coast. And as you move further inland, that once smooth white ice becomes darker. This is the dark zone, and it covers an area of around 248 miles in length and 62 miles at its widest point. This weird phenomenon happens basically for two reasons. The first one is black carbon. Just like dust that builds up on your bookshelf, the ice in Greenland has the same issue. The wind carries a mix of dust and soot to this icy area. But unlike your bookshelf, you can't just wipe it off with a cloth. In Greenland's case, this dirty mix settles on the ice and sticks around for thousands of years. So, the dark zone is basically covered in a fine layer of dust that's built up over time. Back in 2014, researchers analyzed this dirty mix and found that the darker ice areas were filled with black carbon. This black carbon didn't just appear out of thin air. Well, actually, it sorta did. Scientists believe it mostly comes from smoke produced by wildfires in northern Canada and Alaska somewhere in the past. As you might guess, black carbon is black, which is why it makes the ice look darker. Now, the second big reason for the Greenland ice sheet's summer makeover has to do with those algae we mentioned earlier. We're mostly talking about two types of it, the Ancylonema alaskana and the Ancylonema nordenskjoldii. Both of them love cold water regions. During winter, they stay in a dormant state deep within the ice. But when spring comes, they start to slowly migrate to the surface. By the time summer hits, they're ready to bloom and soak up nearly 24 hours of sunlight each day for photosynthesis and growth. Normally, these algae are green, but when exposed to sunlight, they turn brown as a natural way to protect themselves from harmful ultraviolet rays. And this color change is also what makes the ice in Greenland look darker. So far, this has been normal behavior. What's really alarming is that these algae blooms are getting bigger and bigger every year. This happens because they thrive on phosphorus, a nutrient that's plentiful out there and comes from a mineral called hydroxylapatite. This mineral is found in a type of rock that breaks down into tiny dust particles, which are then blown across the ice by the wind. As the climate gets warmer, the rocks dry out more, and stronger winds carry more dust. More dust means more phosphorus, leading to more algae growth. See? It is a cycle, and it keeps getting worse every year. Studying this is crucial to understanding why the dark zone keeps getting bigger. From the year 2000 to 2012, its size increased by 12%. But you might be wondering, why should we care? After all, it's just ice getting darker, right? Well, not exactly. Think about how you can't stand wearing black clothes on a hot, sunny day. They soak up the heat and make you feel even hotter. That's because darker surfaces absorb more sunlight. The same thing happens to ice. Together, dust, black carbon, and algae blooms are responsible for about 70% of the variability in albedo on the Greenland ice sheet. Albedo is just a fancy word for how reflective a surface is. If you take two surfaces, one white and shiny and the other dark and rough, the white one will reflect a lot of light and heat, giving it a high albedo. The dark one, on the other hand, will absorb more light and heat, so it has a low albedo. During the summer, the Greenland ice sheet experiences a reduction in albedo. This means the ice absorbs more sunlight, and when ice absorbs more sunlight, it melts faster than it should. This is why understanding what's happening in the dark zone is so important. It helps predict how quickly the Greenland ice sheet is melting and how it can affect the rest of the world. Greenland's ice sheet is the second largest in the world, covering an area about the size of all the land in the United States east of the Mississippi River. And its huge mass of ice averages a thickness of 1.4 miles. Unfortunately, the ice loss has skyrocketed. Back in the 1990s, Greenland was losing about 25 billion tons of ice per year. Now, it's losing around 234 billion tons per year. That's nearly 10 times more ice melting away each year. According to NASA, if all of Greenland's ice sheet were to melt, it would increase global sea levels by about 24 feet. That could be catastrophic for coastal countries and cities around the world. The Netherlands could be submerged, the Bahamas could be almost completely wiped out, and many of the Philippines Islands would be at risk of disappearing. All of this may seem like a distant reality, and it is true that most scientists believe it would take several hundred or even thousands of years for the ice sheet to melt completely. But it is important to know that Greenland didn't always have this thick layer of ice. Very recently, researchers took a close look at some sediment from the bottom of a 2-mile deep ice core extracted from the center of Greenland. They found that the soil had traces of willow wood, insect parts, fungi, and even poppy seeds. So these fossils are the first direct evidence that Greenland's ice sheet melted away in the recent geological past, around 400,000 years ago. At that time, Greenland was home to a green tundra landscape with insects and plants. This discovery is both fascinating and scary because it shows that the ice sheet collapsed before and might be more fragile than scientists originally thought. There is another concern too. A recent research collected meltwater from different spots on the Greenland ice sheet and found that the water samples were packed with hundreds and thousands of microbes. The concern is that they could be released into the ocean in the future. And some studies already suggest that areas near where a lot of glacial meltwater flows have a higher risk of viruses jumping to new hosts, like from animals to humans. Even though experts believe the chance of a doomsday virus coming from the glaciers is very small, it's still not zero. The truth is, we don't know much about the thousands of microbial species living on the surface of the ice, and there is simply not enough data to fully understand how dangerous these organisms might be. All of this might sound concerning, but we shouldn't panic just yet. There's still a lot we don't understand about what is darkening the Greenland ice sheet. We still need more detailed measurements of the relative abundance of dust, algae, and black carbon, as well as a better understanding of how these potentially dangerous microbes could affect our lives. The more we learn, the better we can predict what's going to happen and how we can prepare for it.
Most people know that pyramids were built as grand tombs for the pharaohs, designed to ensure they had a smooth journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was constructed for the pharaoh Khufu. But what most people don't know is that this whole pyramid building trend started right here with the step pyramid of Djoser about 4,700 years ago. This massive structure was built for Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler from Egypt's 3rd dynasty. It rises 7 layers high above the ground and stands about 200 feet tall. We think of it today as a phenomenal architectural project, but for ancient Egyptians, the step pyramid of Djoser turned out to be more like a massive experiment, a trial run, if you will, to perfect their building skills before they moved on to even more ambitious pyramids. Reaching new heights is super exciting, but the real mystery is what is going on below the ground. In this pyramid's underground labyrinth, there is a network of tunnels stretching about 3.5 miles long, and some researchers believe these tunnels might have been part of a sophisticated water system that could completely change what we think about pyramid construction. Let's talk about this massive complex located in Saqqara. Surrounding the pyramid, there's what's known as a dry moat, a continuous trench that is up to 164 feet wide and almost 2 miles long. It forms a sort of rectangular shape around the pyramid. This trench has an average depth of about 65 feet. Now, if you were to add up all the earth and rock they dug out to create this moat, it would be about 10 times the volume of the step pyramid itself. For the longest time, people just assumed this trench was nothing more than a huge quarry, a place where they dug up stone and clay to build the step pyramid. Makes sense, right? But when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up. The trench is too narrow and deep to be practical for mining, and its layout doesn't match anything we know about ancient Egyptian quarrying methods. Plus, some sections of the trench are actually covered with a rocky ceiling, which would have made it nearly impossible to use as a quarry. Another theory suggests that the dry moat had some kind of spiritual significance. Maybe it was a sacred place, where souls of nobles gathered to serve the late king in the afterlife. There are even niches in the walls that work as a hint at this spiritual function. But most researchers believe that this purpose likely developed much later, long after the complex was built for Djoser. So, what was the moat really designed for? In 2020, a researcher came up with a pretty intriguing idea. It is possible that this trench was actually designed to collect and manage water, especially after heavy rainfalls. Now, that makes sense when you consider the location. The moat sits in an area that could easily have been flooded by runoff water from nearby plains. This could also explain why the trench wasn't used for new graves until much later when the climate became drier and less prone to flooding. The story becomes even more intriguing, as this trench appears to be part of a larger, more complex hydraulic system within the Djoser complex. It is like the trench has several compartments, carefully carved out of the rock and connected by tunnels. These compartments likely served as a part of a water treatment system, where water would flow from one compartment to the next, getting cleaner as it moved along. Now, here is where things start to tie into the pyramid itself. The Djoser complex has a series of underground shafts, and some researchers think that water from the moat's deep trench might have been used to power a hydraulic lift system, and this giant water-powered elevator could have been used to raise the heavy stones needed to build the pyramid. It worked like a volcano, but instead of lava, water did the heavy lifting. Imagine a big deep hole in the ground at the center of the pyramid site. Inside this hole, there was a huge wooden platform, kind of like a giant raft that could move up and down. When the workers wanted to lift a heavy stone, they would fill the hole with water. As the water rose, the wooden platform started to float up, carrying the stone with it, almost like a giant water-powered elevator. When the stone reached the right height, the workers slid it off the platform and onto the pyramid. The idea is that water from the deep trench, after being cleaned and filtered, would flow into these shafts. A massive float, possibly made of wood, would then rise as the water filled the shaft, lifting the stones up to where they were needed for construction. Once the stone was in place, they'd let the water out, lowering the platform back down to the bottom, ready to lift the next stone. This fancy hydraulic lift system could have been a game changer, making the whole building process a lot faster and more efficient without using a lot of workforce. It is like the ancient Egyptians were already embracing the whole idea of work smarter, not harder. But of course, not everyone is on board with this theory. Some experts argue that the area where the step pyramid of Djoser was built couldn't have held enough water from occasional rains to maintain such a fancy hydraulic system. The main theory suggests that, in the past, there might have been some kind of lake nearby, that would have filled up after a period of rain, and this lake could have supplied water to the complex's hydraulic system. But there is no mention of such a lake in any ancient Egyptian writings, so it might be more of a what-if situation than a reality. And then there's the issue of the hard work itself. Remember when I said this method could have allowed the ancient builders to raise stones with far less effort? Well, that might not be entirely true. According to some experts, just building this hydraulic device would have required a lot more heavy work than simply moving the stone blocks using good old-fashioned manpower. And let's not forget, the step pyramid of Djoser is like a baby pyramid compared to those that came later. The stones used for Djoser's pyramid weighed, on average, about 660 pounds each, which is nothing compared to the more than 2.5-ton blocks used later for the pyramid of Chephren. If this cool water lift theory gets completely ruled out, we still need to explain how this pyramid was built in the first place. To answer that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about the original plans. See, before Djoser's tomb became a pyramid, the idea was to construct a simple mastaba. This type of tomb was pretty common in earlier periods, a flat-roofed, rectangular structure with sloping sides. But after the original mastaba was finished, they decided to expand it a bit by adding more layers on top. And then they added even more layers, until the construction reached 6 distinctive steps, each one smaller than the previous. And they probably did all this by raising those heavy stones using ramps, not a water-powered elevator. There is still so much we don't know about the step pyramid of Djoser. More research is definitely needed to fully understand how this system worked, or if it even existed at all. But the idea of using water to help build the pyramid adds a whole new layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. It's a powerful reminder of just how clever and resourceful those builders were, using the natural landscape and the power of water to create one of the most iconic monuments in history. If you walk through this small stone doorway in Hierapolis, Turkey, you might never come back alive. Back in ancient times, people thought it was some sort of portal to the underworld. Romans would go in carrying perfectly healthy bulls, but after a few minutes, they would watch these animals collapse as if hit by some mysterious force. But what's even weirder is that nothing happened to people. They could walk in and out just fine. Now, recent studies might have an answer for these eerie happenings, and it all has to do with people's heights. The gate, known as Plutonium, named after Pluto, the deity of the underworld, is a stone doorway leading to a small 32-square-foot cave. But the real danger is what is going on beneath it. Hierapolis is a super active geological area, and there's a big crack under the city that constantly emits volcanic carbon dioxide, which comes up as a visible mist. During the day, the sun dissipates the gas. At night, the gas forms some kind of a carbon dioxide lake on the sheltered arena floor. At dawn, you need to get out of there before it's too late. This whole place can turn particularly life-threatening right before the sun rises, when the carbon dioxide concentration, about 15 inches above the arena floor, reaches 35%. That means birds, bulls, and even humans can suffocate and pass away in just a couple of minutes. But there is a scientific reason that explains how Romans could get out of there unharmed. The carbon dioxide concentration drops quickly with height, so animals perished while their handlers, being taller and standing up, could walk out and breathe safely. Most people can't stay inside the Bagarn fort after sunset. This 16th century fort, located about 146 miles from Delhi, is known as one of the most haunted places in India. During the day, the area is bustling with visitors who can walk through the main gate of this once grand fort city and check out the ruins of temples and palaces. But they will also see this big sign at the gate that dramatically warns everybody that all access is strictly forbidden after dark. That's probably because at night, according to locals, women can be heard screaming and crying in that place, along with the sounds of bangles breaking and strange music. Others have reported seeing shadowy figures and flashing lights among the ruins, or even smelling a strange perfume floating around. Yawata-no-Yabushirasu is one of Japan's most restricted forests, located in Ichikawa. The forest itself is a small area, covering just a little more than 40 square yards, and it is mostly a thick patch of mosu bamboo. Its location next to a parking lot and modern buildings makes it seem less intimidating, but don't be mistaken by its appearance. Since at least the 19th century, people have said that anyone who enters this forest is bound to disappear and never be seen again. So, as soon as you arrive, a sign near the forest tells you about its history and the curse believed to be linked to it. Some rumors suggest the creepy presence of an ancient samurai lord walking around. Other legends say that the forest hides a bottomless pit filled with poisonous gas. Whether these stories are true or not, today, the area is enclosed by stone walls, and entry is still strictly prohibited. In a valley called the Dark Entry Forest in Connecticut, you will find Dudleytown, but you definitely shouldn't go inside. Not only has the land been private property since the 1920s, but it is also known as one of the spookiest places on Earth. This place was first settled in the early 1740s, and many of the original settlers were from the Dudley family. That's why it's called Dudleytown. There's a local rumor that the town's founders were descended from Edmund Dudley, an English nobleman who lost his life for treason. The legend says this curse followed the Dudley family all the way across the Atlantic to America, and their misfortune is said to be responsible for crop failures, mental problems, and several tragic incidents in the village. Again, it is all just rumors, since historians haven't found any real evidence to support these claims. Still, the pitch-black surroundings and the eerie Blair Witch Project vibe going on in that place fueled ghost stories in the 1980s. This led to many cases of vandalism in the following decade, and because of that, the landowners closed the area to the public. This old abandoned building used to be the fancy palace of King Farouk's family, who was the penultimate king of Egypt back in 1936. After his family members passed away, the palace was turned into a morgue. Locals say that today, the whole place is super creepy and off-limits. Some people have reported seeing light bulbs flicker and shadows move around, making strange noises. Once, a group of kids allegedly went inside and totally freaked out when they found all the doors had suddenly disappeared, leaving them in complete darkness. They had no choice but to start screaming for help. This Hawaiian island has been off-limits to people for over a century. It's called Ni'iau and is the smallest inhabited island in Hawaii, covering around 69.5 square miles. It has around 84 residents. The island doesn't have cell phone service, paved roads, or power lines, just solar panels for electricity. A single family has privately owned the island since 1864, when a Scottish farmer bought it for $10,000, which would be around $250,000 today. The island has stayed in the family, passing down to its descendants, the Robinsons. They have kept it private ever since, so access is highly restricted and basically by invitation only. The Erdstall tunnels are a network of about 2,000 mysterious underground passageways mainly found in Central Europe, especially in Austria and Bavaria. These tunnels are usually narrow and cramped, often just wide enough for one person to squeeze through at a time, and they are believed to date back to the Middle Ages, as far back as the 12th century. What's really puzzling about these tunnels is their purpose. Despite a lot of research, nobody really knows why they were built. There is a theory that they were used for storage, but since many of them are below the waterline and occasionally get filled with water, that doesn't seem very practical. These tunnels have very light, almost claustrophobic sections and sudden drops, which doesn't seem practical for other straightforward uses like escape routes, hiding places, or even spiritual purposes. To make things even more mysterious, there is a complete lack of artifacts, which makes it even harder for researchers to figure out what these tunnels were really for. Since 2019, adventurous people can get arrested if they try to climb this rock. Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, has been off-limits because it is now considered a sacred site for local communities. But the fact that it is also extremely dangerous probably played a big role in the decision to close it off to visitors. This rock is 1,142 feet high, which is about the height of an 80-story building. The climb to the summit can be very slippery, and high temperatures, which can hit 116 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, have led to people passing away from dehydration and heat-related issues. Something even creepier happens at the top of the rock right after storms. When it rains, small tadpole-like crustaceans called shield shrimp hatch in temporary waterholes and rock pools on top of Uluru. These extraterrestrial-looking creatures are about 3 inches long, and they spread their super-resilient eggs everywhere. When enough summer rain comes, they hatch and go wild, feeding on microorganisms and bacteria in the water. How these strange creatures end up in the fleeting pools on top of Uluru is still unclear, but the most likely explanation is that their eggs might travel there with the wind.
When you think of beaches, the first scary thing that pops into your head is probably sharks, right? Those poor guys have a bad rap as the big bullies of the ocean, but honestly, they have way fewer fatal run-ins than jellyfish, algae, and even sand. Every year, tons of people flock to the beach to soak up the sun and chill by the waves, but digging holes in the sand can actually be pretty risky. In February 2024, a tragic incident occurred when a 7-year-old girl got trapped after a roughly 5-foot deep hole she dug with her brother caved in on her. Despite efforts from bystanders to rescue her, help arrived too late. You might think digging in the sand is harmless, but deep holes can be a final exit trap. Sand is defined by its size, not by its material. Most beach sand is quartz, but tropical spots might have coral sand. The weight of the sand depends on what's mixed in. Pure quartz is pretty light, around 90 pounds per cubic foot dried out, while more mixed sands can get way heavier. When sand is wet, it holds its shape better, but when it dries out, it's a whole different story. If you dig a hole and then it dries, it's likely to collapse. The danger increases dramatically if someone is standing near the edge, adding weight and making it even more unstable. Once that sand starts falling in, it fills up all the air pockets, making it hard for anyone trapped inside to breathe. Rescuing a person from a sand collapse is tough. Sand is heavy and keeps collapsing, so rescuers need to move fast. Ideally, they've got about 3 to 5 minutes before the trapped person suffocates. If you ever get in such a situation, the advice is to expose the person's mouth so they can breathe while someone else digs them out. If you're heading to the beach, be smart about holes. The best rule is to never dig a hole deeper than the knees of the shortest person in your group. Also, it's a good idea to fill any holes after you're done playing. It's all too easy for someone to stumble into a forgotten pit, and even a shallow hole can cause injuries. From 1997 to 2007, those sand holes took 31 lives in the US, and that's just within 10 years. Remember I told you sharks are responsible for fewer lives? From 1997 to this day, in 27 years, 29 people in the US have met their early demise because of sharks. Hitting the beach only to find a bunch of algae? Total buzzkill! But while some algae are totally fine, even to munch on, others can bring serious health risks, even if you're just hanging next to them. Algal blooms, or red tides, happen when algae go on a wild growth spree. These blooms can release nasty toxins that are bad news for humans, fish, shellfish, and even birds. One of the most well-known algal blooms rolls around almost every summer on Florida's Gulf Coast, leading to shellfish that are no longer safe to munch on. Even the ones that aren't toxic can throw a wrench in the ecosystem. When all that algae eventually withers and breaks down, it uses up the oxygen in the water, leaving marine life gasping for air. Folks definitely need to steer clear of eating shellfish from areas hit by these toxic algal blooms. Back in 1990, 6 fishermen almost met a tragic end after scarfing down some steamed mussels they'd gathered near Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Swimming in those waters doesn't always pose a serious health risk, but it's still not recommended. Some people might experience skin irritation or itchy eyes. Also, make sure to steer clear of swimming near dead fish, since that's where harmful bacteria can hang out. If you start to feel weird after getting in the water, it's best to get out and rinse off with fresh water right away. You know, it's not always some specific thing that makes certain beaches risky. Sometimes, beaches themselves are just full of surprises. Take Eddy Bay or Mission Beach in Australia, for example. The chances are you'll have to share the sand with cassowaries, some of the most intimidating birds on the planet. Picture getting all set to relax and sunbathe, only to find these giant flightless birds hanging out nearby. They're like emus, but scarier. They can weigh over 160 pounds and might be a bit aggressive, so watch out. If those birds don't freak you out, then the black sand beaches of Kilauea might just do the trick. They sure look inviting, but these beaches are right next to one of the most active volcanoes in the world, Mount Kilauea, which has been erupting since 1983, pouring hot lava into the ocean. These hot waters are not a big deal compared to some Hawaiian beaches. If you ever want to take a dip at Hanakapiai Beach on Kauai's coast, reconsider that plan. The beach is infamous for its strong rip currents that can pull you out to sea in an instant. If you find yourself caught in one, the nearest safe shore is a daunting 6 miles away. Official records show at least 30 fatalities here, but a nearby sign reportedly tallies up to over 80. Rips are those strong currents that pull water out to the ocean, and they can quickly drag people and stuff away from the shallow water near the beach. Typically, they move at about 1 to 2 miles per hour, but they can speed up to 4 or 5 miles per hour, which is faster than the speed of some professional swimmers. These currents are especially fierce when the surf is big, but you should never underestimate any body of water. You can also find rips around river mouths, estuaries, and even near structures like piers and groins. They can be tricky to spot, but you might notice a patch of churning, choppy water on the ocean's surface that signals a rip current. Riptides aren't exclusive to some specific location. They can be found across the world. Playa Zipolite in Mexico, Australia's Fraser Island, and many more. Another water danger is shore break waves. Those are fierce waves that crash straight onto the beach, often right on the sand. Imagine the force of a car slamming down on your body. That's kind of what getting caught in a shore break feels like. Such waves can cause some gnarly injuries, particularly to your neck and spine, even if they don't look super huge. Hawaii is notorious for its intense shore breaks, especially spots like Keiki Beach, where surfers throw caution to the wind for a thrill. So, if you're hitting a Hawaiian beach, keep an eye on those insider waves and always look out for lifeguards. Getting stung by jellyfish is something that happens a lot to folks who are swimming, wading, or diving in the ocean. Those long tentacles can deliver venom through thousands of tiny, sharp stingers. However, to us humans, this venom doesn't do much. Yeah, it's very unpleasant. It gives us burning sensations and probably some skin redness. But that's mostly it. You won't even spot the stung area in a couple of days. Most jellyfish stings will heal up on their own in a few days or weeks with some at-home care, even though sometimes they can lead to something more dangerous with way more severe symptoms. However, if you're hanging out in the coastal waters of northern Australia and the Indo-Pacific region, and you get stung by a jellyfish, you're in for a lot of trouble, my friends. See, it's the area where box jellyfish live, and these jellies are no joke. Some people rightfully call them sea wasps or even marine stingers. They're probably the most hazardous and toxic jellyfish out there. Their sting is incredibly excruciating, so much so that some folks have experienced cardiac arrest before they even made it to the shore. Rumor has it, those jellies are responsible for taking nearly 80 lives in Australia since records started. So how do you tell who's who? Unlike regular jellies, box jellyfish got this pale blue see-through vibe. Also, they got their name because their bell-shaped body looks like a cube.
Now, we wouldn't call this island mystical unless there were tales of giants living here. The island of Gozo in Malta is the backdrop of an ancient legend. Malta is an island country located in the Mediterranean Sea, just south of Europe. It's a very strategically located archipelago. Throughout history, it was ruled by many different societies, such as the Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, and Carthaginians. One cold night, thousands of years ago, a farmer noticed the sky turn orange, then red, when he heard a loud thump. Although the ground seemed to be moving, this wasn't an earthquake. When he looked toward the woods, he saw a giant silhouette, taller than the trees. As he fearfully approached, he realized it was a woman, a giant woman. She introduced herself as Sunsuna. Unlike the terrible giants of many tales, Sunsuna didn't want to exterminate the human race. She was loving and caring. She told the farmer that she and her people could help protect their land from invaders. The locals were pretty interested in this offer. Since Malta is located in an important commercial route, it was constantly being invaded. The story says that Sunsuna settled in Malta, and sooner rather than later, she was moving things around. And when I say things, I mean monoliths. Sunsuna carried huge stones on her shoulder to build a magnificent temple called Gigantia, which means place of giants. She even did this while holding her half-giant, half-human kid on the other shoulder. Some say Sunsuna lived exclusively on beans and honey, although others replace honey with water. The funniest bit here is that Malta is the 10th smallest country in the world, but it somehow managed to host giants. Hey, go figure. The temple looked like a giant game of Tetris, with some stones weighing as much as 20 elephants. Some of these monolithic rocks are so heavy, scholars guess it would take 50 men working together to lift just one stone. Now, as much as this is entertaining, humans never proved giants were real, so this story couldn't be true. There's a brief mention of a species of giants called the Nephilim in some ancient texts. The Nephilims would have been terrible giants that wreaked havoc on the earth and only survived until the Great Flood. But nobody ever found real proof of this species really existing on Earth, until this came along. The world of Maltese archaeology unearthed quite a few shocking things in the past years. One of them are known as the hypogeum skulls. Hypogeum is the Greek word for underground, and this incredible site was discovered in the first decade of the 20th century. Back then, Malta's National Museum director received an important phone call. Someone had accidentally dug some impressive bones and asked him to come check it out. The hypogeum looked like an underground city, filled with mazes and rooms that stretched along multiple floors. They were all made with similar limestones as the Maltese temples above ground. The hypogeum was filled with important relics and artifacts. Scientists quickly understood that the hypogeum was built as a type of final resting place for locals. So, along with skulls, they found a lot of bones and skeletons. One of these artifacts were skulls, but these weren't regular human skulls. Rather, they were of the elongated type. To make matters worse, these skulls were hidden from the public for years. People started to talk and created a bunch of theories behind it. The truth is that this discovery was a turning point for Maltese archaeology, although scientists didn't know what to do with it. Some wondered if these skulls were natural or manipulated, since they knew some cultures in the world used head binds to alter their skulls. Other scientists threw in the hypothesis of little gray people or even the legendary giants. Some say that the elongated skulls could have been sculptures that worshipped otherworldly deities. There was no way to confirm any of these theories, so the question remained: who were the builders of Malta's megalithic temples? Now let's take a look at what scientists know. The Maltese megalithic temples have been standing strong since 3500 BCE, which is even older than the pyramids of Egypt. The main dilemma here is that these temples were built even before we invented writing, yet they required advanced technological skills to exist. The Gigantia Temple seems too absurd to have been built by humans. The South Temple has a corridor with 4 oval rooms on the sides, looking like a big shamrock leaf. In one of these rooms, scientists found altars decorated with spiral patterns. It looked like an altar of some sort, indicating early Maltese people used them for ritualistic purposes. The North Temple is similar but smaller, with a very low entrance that makes people crouch down to get inside. You get it? You need to bow down to their deities in order to get into this sacred place. I mean, one can't help but wonder about the secret reasons these ancient builders had to build such a huge temple. I'm thinking they probably cast one of Daenerys' dragons to move the monoliths around. Yeah, I'm joking here. But hey, remember the entrance to King's Landing? Yup, the series used the Medina Gates in Malta as the exterior of King's Landing during Episode 3 of Season 1. Anyways, back to the giants. The ritualistic theory of the whole thing won a few points when archaeologists uncovered these mysterious figures. They're popularly known as fat ladies. These tiny statues have round bodies and faces that show how much they enjoyed life. They kind of look like a miniature Sunsana, the giantess we talked about. Scientists believe these were statues that celebrated well-being and prosperity. It does prove that the people of the time had advanced craftsmanship skills, and they were pretty intentional with their constructions and art manifestations. One of these statues is known as the Sleeping Lady. This Neolithic piece of art depicts the figure of a large woman lying on her side sleeping. After studying it deeper, scientists guessed this statue was meant to represent the Great Reaper. It was found in the hypogeum, which we now know was a huge resting place. This specific statue is different from all the other fat ladies, starting with the hair and the embroidered skirt. Then there's this statue. This is supposed to represent an 8-foot-tall woman and the rim of her skirt. She was discovered in the most unusual of ways. A farmer was trying to plow his field, but he kept hitting large blocks of stone. All the way back in 1915, the farmer called Malta's National Museum director and asked him to come check it out. Some think this is all the proof you need to confirm that Sunsana was real. Others aren't all that sure. But that's not all. The place where this giant statue was buried revealed one of Malta's most impressive archaeological sites, the Tarsian temples. The temples were made from limestone blocks. Some are 20 feet tall and weigh around 20 tons. Zamet, the museum director, kept digging and discovered multiple sites made of megalithic stones. All of them supposedly built by Stone Age farmers, all stranded on a remote island in the Mediterranean Sea thousands of years ago. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, look at these temples in Manidra. This is probably the world's earliest calendar. On the equinoxes, the sun passes directly through the main doorway, straight down the central axis. On the solstices, there are two superb variations. During the summer solstice, the rays fall on the edge of the megalith to the left of the doorway, and during the winter, the rays fall to the right side of the doorway. It's astronomical precision at its finest. And what about the structures in the Hall Tarsian that we've already talked about? This complex is the oldest one in all of Malta. It was built with the purpose of doing animal offerings to deities. Scientists confirmed this by unearthing numerous animal bones buried in the soil. They also found a great collection of spirals, indicating that the locals also used this temple for ritualistic purposes. Overall, there are 7 megalithic temples in Malta, each more impressive than the other. Scholars keep on digging to see if they can uncover the truth, much like researchers do with the pyramids of Egypt, the lost Mayan cities in the Americas, and other sites.
A loaded Boeing 777 bound for China vanishes into thin air. An eerie monolith suddenly appears in the middle of Utah's desert, only to disappear just as mysteriously. And one of Hollywood's most famous cars, James Bond's iconic Aston Martin DB5, has been missing since 1997. But one burning question remains. How can such massive things just disappear without a trace? Buckle up, because we're about to dive into these wild mysteries and explore what might be hiding right under our noses. The 18.5-inch high bust of Queen Nefertiti is housed in the Neues Museum in Berlin. Apparently, she was like the Beyoncé of ancient Egypt. Absolutely flawless, with high cheekbones, a slender nose, and that mysterious smile, all carved in limestone. But wait, where's her eyeball? Or rather, her iris? Yep, her left eye is just an empty socket staring into eternity. But take a closer look at the iris of the right eye. That, my friend, is quartz. At first, the archaeologist who found it assumed that the crystal had fallen out, so the team tried their absolute best to get it back. But they couldn't find it anywhere, which opened up space for other mysterious theories about its disappearance. Specialists thought that maybe in real life, Nefertiti had some ancient eye infection or a rare disease. But it turns out, nah. This theory probably isn't right, because other statues of her show the left eyeball. So maybe the artist got lazy and only finished one eye, or they just abandoned their studio. I mean, who doesn't feel like ditching work sometimes, saying, "I quit"? Or maybe this bust was just a demo model for official portraits, showing future sculptors how to carve the internal structure of the eye. I know it's hard to believe that this beautiful bust was just a prop for an art class. After all, it is ranked as a masterpiece of craftsmanship. But this theory has some backing. The unpainted sides of the shoulders are listed as the second clue that this bust was meant to be a model. But was it really? Well, nobody can prove it. All we know is that when the bust was found, the eye was already missing, as if it never even had one. So the mystery is still very much alive. From one ancient queen to another, but more modern. Yep, I guess we can say that. I'm talking about Queen Victoria. More precisely, about her missing parliamentary mace, a symbol of authority that's been lost since 1891. Here's the scoop. The 5-foot-long staff, made of silver and topped with a thin overlay of gold, was securely locked away after a late-night assembly. But by the afternoon, it had vanished without a trace. The prime suspect was Thomas Jeffrey, an engineer who was seen leaving the Parliament House with a large, noisy package. Jeffrey claimed it was just scrap metal for his workshop. Then there's a theory about a builder using an open window to sneak in and open the case, though the fingerprints on the windowsill led nowhere. And let's not forget the prankster rumor. Apparently, someone might have borrowed the mace for a joke and forgotten where they had left it. Finally, there's this wild tale of a group of Melbourne ladies supposedly taking it and tossing it into the Maribyrnong River. Despite all the wild theories, the mace is still missing. We still don't know who took it or if any of those suspects were actually involved. But whoever grabbed it probably thought it was some kind of valuable treasure. In reality, it was almost worthless, costing Parliament less than £300. Sure, that's about $50,000 today, which is not bad at all. But what I'm saying is, if the suspect was trying to get rich, it would have been a lot easier and more profitable to take any silverware or plates from the speaker's room. In 2020, a shiny metal monolith suddenly appeared in the Utah desert, like a sci-fi prop that got lost. Standing about 9.8 feet tall, it looked like it was waiting for cosmic entities or a film crew to show up. But instead of that, the monolith took center stage in a real-life mystery. The monolith was found by a helicopter pilot doing an annual bighorn sheep count above a rugged area in the desert. Soon after, the monolith's eerie appearance grabbed the media's attention, sparking all sorts of wild theories. Most of them, of course, involved extraterrestrials. But my absolute favorite is that this piece was created by an avant-garde artist who's really into 2001: A Space Odyssey. While everyone was scratching their heads, a photographer reported seeing 4 guys come in, break the monolith apart, and make off with the pieces in a wheelbarrow. Yep, they literally rolled away with it. One of them even said, "Leave no trace," as if they were auditioning for a secret agent role. That means that while some were dreaming of interstellar visitors, the real action was probably much more down to earth. Still, the Utah monolith mystery remains unsolved. Nobody knows exactly who took it, and no one has seen it since. Yeah, that's right. Although people claim to have seen it being destroyed, one theory suggests that this strange piece might still be intact in the backyard of one of the suspects. The Florentine diamond is a pale yellow gem, weighing a whopping 137 carats. That's about the size of a small walnut, which makes it huge compared to the typical diamonds you find in jewelry stores. Unfortunately, this historical gem is missing, and its story sounds like it was ripped straight from an adventure novel. It all started in the 15th century with Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. I mean, we think so because its origins are still disputed. Theory number 1 says that when Charles met his unfortunate end, he was wearing the diamond. Then, a peasant or a soldier allegedly saw the yellow rock and thought it was just glass, selling it at a very cheap price. Not a great deal, especially since if this diamond were auctioned today, it could be worth more than $20 million. Some people think that this story is just a tale, because the first historical reference to the diamond comes much later, in 1657, when French traveler Jean-Baptiste Tavernier described a large gem owned by Ferdinand II de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. So, that takes us to theory number 2. When the last Medici passed away, the Habsburg family put their hands on the gem, making it part of the Austrian crown jewels. When the empire collapsed, Emperor Charles I of Austria allegedly took the diamond with him into exile. In 1918, someone close to the imperial family decided to borrow the diamond, if you know what I mean, and took it to South America, along with other crown jewels. So, the Florentine diamond could have been part of a royal gem heist, but as a victim, I guess. Rumor has it that in the 20s, the diamond somehow made its way to the United States, received a bit of a makeover by being recut, and was sold off. But was it really? Well, no one knows. From priceless diamonds to cold Coke. Honestly, on a scorching summer day, a refreshing drink feels just as valuable. Next on our list is a mystery soda machine. This vintage gem popped up in Capitol Hill, Seattle, sometime in the late 90s. And let me tell you, it was like no other. People used to say that it had a bunch of mystery buttons that, instead of your usual Coke or Sprite, dispensed some pretty strange and elusive flavors. Imagine the fun of pressing a button and wondering if you'd get ginger ale, grape soda, or something bizarrely new. No one knew exactly who stocked the machine. Over time, locals spun legends that it was haunted or had a mind of its own. This mysterious Coke machine became so famous in Seattle that it had its own Facebook page with over 24,000 followers. Then, in June 2018, it vanished with a note saying, "Went for a walk." Theories flew about where the soda machine went, from the Space Needle to a secret life somewhere else. Unfortunately, despite a few faux sightings, the machine remains lost. If that's not the coolest, most enigmatic vending machine ever, I don't know what is. Let's suppose you're strolling along the beach in Hamamatsu City, Japan, soaking up the sun and listening to the waves, when, out of nowhere, you spot a 5-foot-wide metal sphere. Most people would probably freak out, thinking it's a spy balloon, a mysterious aircraft, or, I don't know, a Dragon Ball. This exact scenario happened to one guy last year. He probably thought it was just a weird beach ball, so he tried to push it. Naturally, it didn't move one bit. A month later, this giant metal ball was making headlines worldwide because no one had any clue where it came from. The local police, suspecting it might be dangerous, closed off the beach and got busy with X-rays. Eventually, once they realized it wasn't dangerous, the officials just decided to move the mysterious ball out of there. They said it would be stored for a certain period of time and then disposed of. but people are still scratching their heads about where it ended up. I mean, those words were pretty vague, and the authorities never exactly said what they did with it. I know we've been chatting about single items up to this point, but things are about to escalate. Over a dozen sculptures, murals, and installations have vanished in Baltimore, and nobody seems to have a clue why. Take The Guide, for example, a 15-foot-tall sculpture that stood proudly outside Baltimore City College for more than 30 years. One day in 2014, the city's art conservator shows up and, surprise, surprise, the sculpture is gone. But wait, how does a massive steel sculpture just disappear like that? Did no one see this happen? Well, apparently not. And this wasn't a one-off. Since 1992, 14 artworks have disappeared or been found in a sad state. Although some people have been investigating the case, so far, nobody has any idea what happened or where the works are. Maybe they were taken by some high-stakes art collectors, or perhaps someone thought they could use them as fancy garden gnomes. It's hard to think of anything more mysterious than an airplane disappearing without a trace. You have probably heard of Amelia Earhart, the groundbreaking American aviator who became a true legend. In 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean, making a daring trip from Canada to Northern Ireland. Then, in 1935, she was the first person to fly solo from Hawaii to the US mainland, completing a dangerous 2,408-mile flight that had already claimed several lives. She also became the first female vice president of the National Aeronautic Association. Her list of records goes on. So let's just say she's got a bit obsessed with pushing boundaries. But her ultimate goal was to be the first woman to fly all the way around the world. So in 1937, she took off on this epic journey in a Lockheed Electra 10E. But things went horribly wrong. During a flight from Leh to Honolulu, communication problems and faulty tracking led to her disappearing over the Pacific Ocean. Despite tons of sea and air searches, neither she nor her plane was ever found, making it one of aviation's biggest mysteries. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is kind of like today's version of Amelia Earhart's missing plane. On March 2014, a Boeing 777 took off from Kuala Lumpur, heading for Beijing, but it never made it. It vanished from air traffic control screens, but military radar briefly picked it up when it strayed off course before disappearing completely. Picture a massive, high-tech search operation stretching from the South China Sea all the way to the Indian Ocean. What's really weird about this whole thing is that even with a huge search effort, both in the air and at sea, we still don't know exactly what happened. Theories range from the pilot intentionally crashing the plane and mechanical failure to an elaborate hijacking, but nothing concrete has turned up. The only thing we know is that the last confirmed signals from the plane pointed to a remote part of the Indian Ocean, and that's pretty much it. The next mode of transportation on our list became legendary thanks to the movies. There it is. It's James Bond's iconic Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger. This wasn't just any car. It was a superstar, complete with a hidden telephone, an ejector seat, tire shredders. It had more tricks up its sleeve than Bond himself. But on June 18, 1997, this famous DB5 vanished from a hangar in Florida. That's right, it just disappeared like a magic trick gone wrong. At that time, the car was owned by businessman and car collector Anthony Pugliese III and was worth a whopping $7 to $10 million. It wasn't the best disappearing act, though. Tire drag marks on the floor leading out of the hangar made investigators think the car was probably hauled out by its axles and loaded onto a flatbed truck. If that was the case, the thieves likely waited until after dark to make their move. Now, onto the theories. Some folks think it was shipped off to a secret lair, maybe a swanky palace in the Middle East. Others believe it might have been sunk into the ocean, Bond style. There's even a rumor that Pugliese himself hid the DB5 in a warehouse in New Jersey. Despite a six-figure reward and a detective hot on the case, the legendary car's whereabouts are still a mystery. The list of missing Hollywood props doesn't stop there, and Tony Stark might need to file a police report. In 2018, the original Iron Man suit worn by Robert Downey Jr. simply vanished from a warehouse in Los Angeles. That iconic red and gold suit from the 2008 Iron Man film, valued at $325,000, just poof, disappeared. You'd think if someone took it for the money, they'd grab more stuff from the prop storage, right? Come on, that place was full of objects from Hollywood. But nope, the suit was the only thing that disappeared. With no suspects in sight and no other items reported missing, this possible heist feels like it could have been pulled off by Thanos himself. You know, if he wasn't, well, fictional. The last item on our list is out of this world. And I mean quite literally. Back in the 70s, after Apollo 17, astronauts Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt picked up a moon rock and decided to share a piece with the world. I mean, why not, right? So authorities chopped up the rock. Actually, there were 3 different sources and sent 270 pieces as gifts to different nations around the globe. Fast forward to today, and over half of these Goodwill moon rocks have vanished. Some of them simply disappeared, while others just got tossed in the trash. As strange as it might sound, Ireland's moon rock ended up in Dublin's garbage dump after a fire at an observatory. Joseph Guttheins, a former NASA agent who became a moon rock detective, has been on a quest to recover those cosmic gifts. He even offered $10,000 for Malta's missing moon rock, but it still hasn't been found. Apparently, the moon rocks are like celestial treasures. So, if you've got a rogue moon rock hanging around, you might want to check if it's on Guttheins' radar.
This tourist destination has the highest entrance price of all. It could cost you your life. Those who spend over 16 hours in the death zone, and it is the official name of the most dangerous area on Mount Everest, risk never returning home. Those who endure 48 hours there will almost certainly never see their families again. The altitude in this region is over 26,000 feet, and winds can reach speeds of 62 miles per hour, sweeping everything, including you, off their path. Only one person has stood tall in this hostile environment for 90 hours. There was a bit of cheating involved, as it was with supplemental oxygen. Yep, the precious O2 gas is extremely scarce there. Without this vital resource, the maximum time someone can survive is about 21 hours. A record set by this guy. Yeah, he was tough. He reached the Everest peak 10 times. His fastest ascent took slightly under 17 hours, but Pemba broke his record, ascending Everest in 8 hours and 10 minutes. However, these accomplishments are not feats for the average Joe. These record holders have, in a sense, won a genetic lottery. Both are Nepalese Sherpas, hence the names. Sherpas are native to the mountains and have evolved a natural resistance to high-altitude living. Despite the undeniable dangers, people seem unwilling to stop visiting the death zone. Since the establishment of climbing records, over 300 people have lost their lives there. Last year alone, 18 people perished, and as of July 2024, the death zone has claimed 8 lives. Now, as creepy as it may sound, the death zone on Mount Everest resembles a graveyard. The challenge lies in that of recovering a body from this perilous location costs families a fortune. Oxygen alone, which is necessary to descend a body, can amount to as much as 20 grand. This may seem far-fetched, but the operation requires 12 people, each needing an oxygen cylinder that costs around $400. So, do the math. And it's not just the oxygen. Imagine the other expenses summed up. Still, it's not only the money. The retrieval process is fraught with danger for those tasked with it, causing many private companies to decline such requests. Recently, authorities managed to recover 4 bodies and a skeleton from the treacherous area. While not all of them have been identified, one body belonged to an individual who passed away in 2017, remaining in the death zone for 7 years. El Caminito del Rey in Spain, Maluga, may look like child's play compared to Everest's death zone, as reportedly it has only claimed 6 lives. But still, this is eerie. Imagine you're standing on an old piece of wood some people dare to call a walkway that seems to be about to fall apart. You can't really move freely on it, as it's just 3 feet wide, and if you look down, you'll see nothing but a river 330 feet below you. You may want to sarcastically call it an engineering wonder, but in reality, it really is. Look, it seems like this walkway was glued to the side of a cliff. The tools and technique used to build it were quite rudimentary and unsafe, which is not surprising. The pathway is over a century old. If you're wondering how it was built without any machinery we have today, let me explain. The poor builders just hung off the side of the mountain using ropes. It's obvious no one wanted to work on that project, so prisoners who had received the death penalty were invited to participate. In exchange, they could get a reduction in their sentences, if they made it out alive, of course. Now, originally the walkway was built to connect workers at the hydroelectric power plants by some local waterfalls. You know, just a little bridge to help them cross while transporting materials and keeping things in check at the channel. The construction kicked off in 1901 and wrapped up by 1905. The walkway was famously crossed by King Alfonso XIII in 1921 during the inauguration of a dam. This pathway has seen some rough times by the early 2000s and was partly closed for over a decade. 4 years of renovations and €9 million later, it burst back onto the scene in 2015. It has gained a reputation as the world's most dangerous walkway due to a couple of tragic accidents in the late 90s. Now, you can stroll along a 1.8-mile path that hugs the edge of the gorge. Hey, remember I told you this Caminito only took 6 lives? Forget it. Nobody knows how much it really was. Alright, the next cliff destination may seem totally safe at first glance, but it's all about a very particular activity performed there. It's definitely not as high up in the sky as El Caminito del Rey, only soaring 89 feet, but this cliff is meant to jump from, and people actually do that. Now, if you were to take a watermelon and give it a dramatic drop into the water below, you'd end up with a spectacular crimson splash of watermelon juice, looking like a crime scene. It would plummet at a wild speed of 53 miles per hour, and it begs the question, can a human handle that kind of dive? Spoiler alert, absolutely. Welcome to Red Bull cliff diving, where brave athletes take the plunge from heights equivalent to an 8-story building. But before you think about trying this for kicks, let me tell you, it takes serious fitness to pull it off. The better your shape is, the better your dive, but it's also all about your peepers. Your eyes become your ultimate navigation system as you make that fearless leap. Fearless? The impact is no joke. If you dare to jump, you'll feel around 5 g-force on impact. For comparison, when you're on a commercial flight, even during the craziest turbulence, you rarely feel more than 1.3 g-force. But when you dive from a cliff, your heart's working overtime, and that 5 g-force can leave you lightheaded in no time. Your brain starts to feel a bit oxygen-starved, and before you know it, you could black out in a few seconds. All that blood suddenly rushes to your head, your face puffs up, and your lower eyelids practically cover your eyes. This phenomenon is called red-out, because all you see is a bright glow through those squeezed-shut eyelids. Yeah, that sounds like fun. Now, unlike all those cliffs, this place is pretty accessible, and is popular among freedivers for having little current, which is good when you go in depth. However, despite all those seemingly nice aspects of the Blue Hole in Egypt, this place has taken around 200 lives in recent years. Now, to be honest, technically, the Blue Hole is a complete average dive spot. There's nothing extraordinary that would make it more dangerous than any other spot in the Red Sea. However, diving through the arch at the Blue Hole is no joke. It's a tricky submerged tunnel that has seen its fair share of accidents. While there's no official count of how many have lost their lives here, one source estimates that around 130 divers perished there between 1997 and 2012. That's more than 8 each year. Some say the number could be as high as 200, including a few snorkel-related accidents not tied to the arch dive. To help keep things safe, Egyptian authorities placed a police officer at the Blue Hole who makes sure divers are with certified guides who know the ropes. Now, the arch itself sits 170 feet down, which means you really need to know what you're doing and have the right gear, since recreational divers usually max out at around 100 feet or so. For experienced technical divers, it's mostly manageable. The real challenge is keeping track of your air in your tank, because if you mess up and take too long down there, you're going to need more than one tank of air to get through safely. If the gas isn't planned out right, you could find yourself short on air when you need to do your decompression stops, or even worse, you can run out of it completely. And, that would be bad.
The latest super eruption of Yellowstone occurred 640,000 years ago, and it was long before Homo sapiens saw the light of day. But we were around during another, no less devastating natural disaster. This super eruption took place on the island of Sumatra around 74,000 years ago. That's when an erupting supervolcano wreaked havoc on huge territories, sending up plumes of debris and ash that spread for thousands of miles and caused temperatures on the planet to plummet. The effects of this super eruption were visible as far away as southern Africa. Experts believe they could have impacted early humans there. By the time the volcano erupted, our ancestors had already been using stone tools and had likely known how to produce yarn. And some specialists even think that the Toba super eruption was so powerful it could push our ancestors to the brink of extinction. They claim that Toba might be the largest volcanic eruption to occur on Earth within the last 2 million years. The eruption disgorged so much pyroclastic rock, it would be enough to cover the entire United States to the depth of a one-story house. About a third of that deposit piled up on northern Sumatra, while a lot more ended up beneath the floor of the Indian Ocean. The super eruption left an elliptical crater lake around 60 miles long. The caldera is so large it's hard to feel that you're indeed in a volcano. Pumice deposits from the eruption remain in the canyon walls and go deep below the ground. There aren't many arguments about the amount of pumice and ash involved in this disaster. At the same time, experts aren't sure how much sulfur ended up in the atmosphere. Even some sulfur layers in the polar ice could be potential candidates, but so far, scientists haven't found any connection between them and Toba. But let's get back to the dramatic impact the super eruption had on early humans. It turns out, some not only survived, but even thrived after this natural catastrophe, at least judging by the artifacts they made during and after the eruption. The disaster might not have posed a serious threat to those of our ancestors who took refuge along the coast. Genetic evidence hints that modern humans descend from a few thousand people that ventured out of Africa around 60,000 years ago. Why just a few thousand? According to some experts, the rest of our ancestors could have been devastated by the Toba eruption. After all, the supervolcano spewed out 1,000 cubic miles of dust and rock in a flash, leaving a scar in the ground that was dozens of miles wide. All that dust and sulfur Toba sent into the atmosphere potentially cooled the surface of our planet, which led to the appearance of glaciers and the lowering of Earth's sea levels. And since Toba might have had an important role in shaping humankind, scientists have been working hard trying to understand precisely how early humans reacted to this disaster. In 2011, several researchers found an enigmatic soil sample in South Africa's Pinnacle Point, an archaeological site overlooking the Indian Ocean. This sample contained some volcanic ash. After examining the layer, they found more than 400,000 artifacts left by early humans. Those ranged from heat-treated stone tools to signs of fire and animal bones. Based on this finding, the team suggested that early humans on the South African coast thrived after the eruption, living in that area for thousands of years and improving their tools. The region might have served as a refuge during and after the Toba eruption. A 2009 study suggested that the eruption could have lowered global temperatures by 14 degrees Fahrenheit. It would have made survival tough elsewhere in Africa. If there had been a volcanic winter, it wouldn't have been as cold along the coastline. On the other hand, newer studies claim that Toba spewed out so much sulfur into the atmosphere that the resulting aerosols could have stuck together, which would have limited their cooling effect in the long term. In other words, right after the eruption, temperatures would have plummeted, but only in some regions. And after 3 years or so, the effects of the eruptions would have calmed down altogether, becoming not dangerous to humans. Well, apparently, more research is needed. Meanwhile, let's figure out if we should watch out for any volcanoes these days. Last year, thousands of small earthquakes shook the ground near Iceland's Svartsengi geothermal power plant. Magma rose to the surface there, and now it has opened wide fractures slicing through the small town of Grindavik. The ground there is still swelling, and an eruption might happen with little notice. But of course, that's not all. Over the planet, 45 other volcanoes keep rumbling. For example, Italy's Vesuvius, that infamous thing that finished the city of Pompeii in 79 CE. Over the last 17,000 years, the volcano has experienced 8 explosive eruptions, followed by powerful pyroclastic flows, dense masses of super hot ash, lava fragments, and gases flowing at high speeds. The volcano's last eruption happened in 1944. Mount Rainier is one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the USA. Its high elevation, chemical composition, and proximity to Washington's Seattle and Tacoma suburbs, and the volcano's ability to produce massive pyroclastic flows make Mount Rainier a threat to consider. The heat from this volcano could potentially melt the ice and snow covering it, leading to rapid downstream flows of debris, mud, and rocks. The Novarupta volcano in Alaska's Katmai National Park and Reserve formed in a 1912 eruption, which was the world's largest in the 20th century. The volcano sent almost 7 cubic miles of ash and debris into the air. It also produced such a powerful ash flow that it created the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Mount Pinatubo is located in a populated region in the Philippines. It became notorious after a 1991 massive eruption, which was the second largest eruption of the 20th century. More than 700 people lost their lives during that natural disaster. Today, more than 21 million people live within 62 miles of Pinatubo. Mount Agun, a continuously erupting volcano in Indonesia, had its last major eruption in 1963. It was one of the most tragic eruptions in the country's history. It lasted for 11 months, producing ashfall and pyroclastic flows that led to the loss of more than 1,000 lives and serious property damage. People saw ash plumes above the volcano throughout 2018, following the eruption in November 2017. Japan's Mount Fuji hasn't erupted since 1707. That year, a massive earthquake likely set it off. In 2014, experts warned that Fuji could be at risk of another eruption following the 9-magnitude earthquake that shook Japan in 2011. Experts believed the earthquake had raised pressure below Fuji. The eruption in 1707 sent so much ash and debris into the air that all this mass even reached Tokyo. Should Fuji erupt again, it would affect more than 25 million people in the surrounding areas. The eruption of Washington's Mount St. Helens in 1980 was one of the most destructive volcanic events in U.S. history. 57 people, as well as thousands of animals, lost their lives during that natural disaster. The eruption also destroyed around 200 square miles of forest. Experts think that Mount St. Helens' history of massive eruptions means that future catastrophes are bound to happen. The next explosive eruption might send large amounts of ash all over the Pacific Northwest. No wonder the volcano is under close monitoring. One of Indonesia's most active volcanoes, Mount Merapi, has been erupting for centuries. NASA claims that the biggest risk of this volcano is pyroclastic flows, which can spread over vast areas and harm loads of people. For the last time, Merapi erupted in January 2024, sending plumes of smoke into the air. These days, more than 24 million people live in the area surrounding this volcano. Salt makes our chips and popcorn taste yummy, but it turns out that's not all. It's used in household and industrial products, from cosmetics to fertilizers, from water treatment to road gridding. All over the globe, around 300 tons of salt are produced every year. But there's a problem. That's too much salt for our planet. You see, salt rises to Earth's surface from deep oceanic rocks gradually, and this process is quite balanced, or it used to be. Humans are pushing this balance out of whack. Our demand keeps increasing, and we're releasing too much salt into the soil, air, and sea. And if this process continues unchecked, we might face an existential threat. Yep, it's as serious as that, and a recent study conducted by the University of Maryland confirms this. There is this thing called the natural salt cycle. It's existed for thousands of years. Salt naturally rises to our planet's surface via geologic uplift and rock weathering. Sometime later, rocks break down and release salt ions into the soil. Some of these ions are absorbed by plants and organisms. Others are washed away into rivers, which transport them into oceans. Salt also gets into the atmosphere. It happens through salt dust in dry regions and sea spray in coastal areas. It's crucial for humans because our bodies need salt, just like animals and plants do. Simply put, we're electrical systems controlled by salt. Soil needs salt because otherwise it won't clump together. Plants also need small amounts of salt since those allow them to have proper metabolism and synthesize enough chlorophyll. At the same time, too much salt isn't a great thing. And nowadays, human activity is messing with the natural salt cycle, bringing salt to the planet's surface much more quickly than before. That's the conclusion researchers made after combining data from different sources, including the U.S. Geological Survey's Mineral Yearbook and global records of river compositions and salinity measurements. The main factor bringing about these changes is salt mining for food and other products. Then there are also acid rains. Those increase the rate of rock weathering. These and other factors speed up the generation of salt at the surface of our planet. At the moment, the concentration of salt in the world is too high. The soil, plants, and animals can't use all of it. Even worse, some essential species can't survive with all this extra salt. Their demise changes biodiversity and can lead to the appearance of invasive species, such as phragmites. Those are tall, reedy plants taking over coastal areas. Then, there's also zooplankton, an important ocean species regulating algae. It's extremely sensitive to salt. If this species starts to decline, it might mess with the world's food webs. Too much salt also turns farmlands into wastelands. Recent reports have shown that around 833 hectares of land are already affected. And that's the area around 4 times the size of India. In some countries, huge areas become infertile because of oversalination. Plus, excess salt is bad for our health. The thing is, all that extra salt gets into groundwater, making it too salty for human consumption. It's particularly bad for people with sodium-restricted diets. And I'm not only talking about table salt or sodium chloride. No, other calcium and magnesium-based salts are seeping out too, usually from the production of fertilizers and building materials. It's like a chemical cocktail of different salts coming from various sources, and scientists don't know yet the effects such a cocktail can have on us humans and our health. So, maybe now you're sitting and thinking, oh, it's time to cut back on my salt intake. Perhaps, but don't cut it all out. In the 1930s, Dr. Robert McCants from Cambridge University's Department of Experimental Medicine found 4 volunteers and asked them to go 10 days completely without salt. First, they had to sweat out the salt that still remained in their bodies, and after that, the scientists literally desalinated everything they were allowed to eat and drink. Soon after, the participants started to experience weird sensations. They realized that they didn't taste much flavor in anything they consumed. It got worse. Fatigue set in, and the volunteers soon got too tired to even eat. They began to show the signs of hyponatremia. It occurs when the concentration of sodium in your blood is dangerously low. And that's when a person's blood cells swell because there's not enough salt in the blood to regulate how much water a cell should and will consume. If this condition is left untreated, it can not only result in seizures, but also have much, much worse consequences. At the end of the trial period, participants got some salty foods, and miraculously, within a few minutes, they could taste again, and their energy seemed to be replenished almost immediately. Honestly, it sounds kinda terrifying. If that's what a mere 10 days without salt are, imagine what catastrophe it would be if salt just ceased to exist. We wouldn't be able to last long, that's for sure. And it would be a never-ending drama, not only for us, but for plants and animals too. They need salt as much as we do. If our oceans suddenly lost all the salt, it would wipe out all underwater algae, cutting photosynthesis on Earth almost in half. Land-based plants would follow suit. So, soon after the disappearance of salt, we'd face a huge issue. Too much carbon dioxide and not nearly enough oxygen. Our climate would start fluctuating between extremely hot and cold temperatures, and hurricanes would become insanely powerful and super destructive. Luckily, we still have salt at our stores, and the natural salt cycle might get more or less stable again. By the way, humanity has known of and appreciated salt for many centuries. For example, it was used as offerings and to preserve mummies in ancient Egypt. It was a valuable commodity traded between the Phoenicians and their Mediterranean empire. In ancient China, people knew of more than 40 types of salt and used it for medicinal purposes. In medieval continental Europe, Venice gained power through its salt monopoly. The production and transportation of salt led to the appearance of new cities and the construction of roads. Salzburg, the city of salt in Austria, is a great example of that. Even these days, salt continues to surprise us. For example, recently, researchers from the University of Miami Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science have discovered rare deep-sea brine pools in the Gulf of Aqaba. That's a northern extension of the Red Sea. Those salty underwater lakes are likely to hold secrets about the way oceans on Earth formed all those millions of years ago. They might also give us some clues to life on other planets. Brine pools are some of the most extreme environments on Earth. And still, despite their ultra-high salinity, somewhat exotic chemistry, and total lack of oxygen, they're teeming with life. Researchers have even found bioactive molecules with potential anti-cancer properties in brine pool microbes in the Red Sea. These super salty zero-oxygen brine pools are located close to the coast and might preserve information on tsunamis, earthquakes, and flash floods that took place in the Gulf of Aqaba thousands of years ago. Salt has even made its way into space. Well, kind of. You see, the moon is like a comet soaring through the cosmos. Our natural satellite is followed by a slender tail consisting of irradiated matter, and our planet passes directly through this tail once a month. Well, according to a study published in the journal JGR Planets, this lunar tail is made of millions of sodium atoms. And as you already know, the chemical formula of salt is sodium chloride. Those atoms get blasted out of the lunar soil by meteor strikes and then pushed thousands of miles downstream by solar radiation. For several days a month, when the new moon is located between Earth and the Sun, the gravity of our planet drags that sodium tail into a long beam, which wraps around our planet's atmosphere. The tail itself is harmless and invisible to the unaided eye, but during those new moon days, high-powered telescopes can detect the faint orange glow of sodium in the sky.